What caused the UPS plane crash in Louisville Carway? How the MD-11 engine fell off? UPS Flight 2976. It began as an ordinary overnight cargo run, a jet humming through moonlit air, crew doing what they do every night, move freight safely, efficiently, and on schedule. The aircraft was an MD-11, a three-engine workhorse that had earned a reputation in the cargo world for range and payload. Its crew was experienced. Their pre-flight checks were routine. The weather in Louisville, Kentucky was predicted to be benign. Nobody on the ground or in the cockpit could have foreseen a fracture so small and quiet that it would later be described as catastrophic. The approach, a routine that became fatal. As the MD-11 descended toward Bowman Field, the aircraft followed the expected
Engine start selectors
checklist
to continuous.
Continuous. Flaps, gear, final approach speed. Radios chirped. The pilots briefed the landing. For the passengers who might have been on a passenger flight, this would be mundane. For a cargo flight, especially at night, it's a mode of business as usual. A long train of repetitive tasks performed to muscle memory. Suddenly, and without any audible prelude on the flight deck recorders at first, the aircraft shuddered. It was not the gentle rumble of turbulence or the warning buzz of minor system anomalies. The shudder was violent, immediate, the kind of mechanical violence that arrests attention and then drives everything into emergency mode. Instruments that had been steady seconds before flickered, then collapsed. The left wing engine, once powering and stabilizing the MD-11, separated from the aircraft and tumbled away into the night. Witnesses on the ground later described a trailing line of sparks and, for a fleeting moment, an engine falling like a meteor into the trees beyond the airport fence. On board, the aircraft's balance changed in an instant. Asymmetrical thrust, an imbalance in lift. Hydraulics deals with abnormal loads. The MD-11, designed around the reliability of three engines and an integrated hydraulic architecture, was suddenly a system with a missing, massive component and an immediate cascade of failures. The human fight, the crew's response. From the cockpit came the compressed, urgent voice of trained professionals attempting to arrest the aircraft's trajectory. The pilots cycled emergency checklists at lightning speed, declare the engine out, trim for asymmetric flight, and attempt to stabilize. Their reactions mattered. They had minutes, maybe seconds, of control before an aircraft in that condition would become unrecoverable. In the brief time that followed, there were heroic piloting attempts to maintain altitude and control. The first officer reported abnormal hydraulic pressure readings. The flight control field changed. Inputs to the yoke yielded muted responses, and the aircraft began to yaw toward the damaged wing. On the ground, emergency services scrambled. Radar blips and air traffic controller callouts traced those last minutes with clinical finality. Deviation from glide path, a rapid descent, and finally, an impact a few miles short of the runway. There were no dramatic alarms that explained everything, only the aftermath. A mangled fuselage, scorched earth, and a scattering of debris that would later be methodically collected by investigators. The crash scene was a jigsaw of metal and human tragedy. The forensics, metal fatigue, maintenance, and the pylon. What causes an engine to detach from a modern airliner? The question drove the investigation. Engines are bolted to wings through pylons, complex assemblies engineered with huge safety margins. For an engine to separate, the failure must be structural, usually preceded by progressive damage. Cracks, corrosion, or undetected fatigue that grows over time until a critical load finally snaps the connection. Investigators focused on the pylon, the interface between wing and engine, and the maintenance records. Within those records, they searched for the smallest anomalies, bolt torque variations, unusual vibration reports, or inspections where a technician had noted accept rather than repair. Forensic metallurgists examined fractured surfaces under microscopy. They looked for telltale signatures, beach marks from fatigue growth, corrosion pits, or evidence of an undetected manufacturing defect. In many cases like this, the culprit be not one single mistake, but a chain of small failures that align into a catastrophe. The investigative team reconstructed the timeline of loading on the pylon. Over tens of thousands of flight hours, tiny cracks can initiate at stress concentrators, places where paint peels, where drainage is imperfect, where an earlier repair or a tightened bolt created a micro notch. These cracks are slow and stealthy. They live in darkness inside composite or metal assemblies until the load on a landing approach. The combination of thrust reverser dynamics, flap positions, and slight gusts becomes the straw that breaks the camel's back. The working hypothesis grew: a latent fatigue crack, missed during routine inspections, progressed slowly and then accelerated under the transient loads of descent and landing. When the crack reached a critical size, the pylon could no longer carry the combined weight and aerodynamic forces. The engine tore away. Systemic failures, inspections, procedures, and culture. Aircraft accidents reveal not only mechanical failures, but also systemic weaknesses. How maintenance programs are designed, how crews report anomalies, and how regulators enforce compliance. In the wake of the crash, maintenance logs were re-examined for patterns that might indicate broader issues. Had there been repeated low-grade vibration reports dismissed as normal? Had non-destructive inspection, NDI, checks been performed at the correct intervals and with the right equipment and training? Was there pressure to keep aircraft flying on tight schedules at the expense of thorough inspections? Interviews with line mechanics and maintenance supervisors painted a complex picture. Budget constraints and throughput pressures are realities for many cargo operators. When resources are stretched, there can be a drift from ideal inspection regimes. It's not always intentional negligence. Often, it's an incremental lowering of standards. Deferred repairs here, extended inspection intervals there, that transform safety margins into liabilities. This accident forced a hard look at that drift. The questions spilled out. Were inspection intervals adequate for aging airframes? Were technicians trained and certified for the types of NDI required? Did manufacturers' service bulletins reach the right people in time? And crucially, did safety culture empower technicians to ground an aircraft until suspicious findings were absolutely cleared? The aftermath. Families, community, and industry. The crash in Louisville reverberated beyond the airport perimeter. Families of the crew, co-workers, and the entire operations community were left with grief and unanswered questions. For the community living near the crash site, the wreckage and salvage operations were stark, shocking reminders that modern aviation, for all its sophistication, still carries risk. The airline faced scrutiny. Lawsuits and liability claims were inevitable. But beyond legal consequences, there was another response, a wave of safety directives. Regulators and the manufacturer issued urgent inspection mandates. Fleet operators initiated pylon inspections across similar types, pulling aircraft temporarily out of service to ensure no other latent cracks existed. Technical fixes and lessons learned. The technical follow-ups were surgical and precise. Engineers recommended bolstering inspection regimes with better non-destructive testing. Ultrasonic and eddy current inspections specifically targeted at pylon attachment points. Some suggested redesigning stress concentrators where feasible, while others focused on improving lightning and corrosion protection paths. Maintenance training was revamped to emphasize fatigue detection, and service bulletins were rewritten to be clearer and more prescriptive. Some operators adopted more conservative life limits for critical pylon components, and regulators updated airworthiness directives to require enhanced inspection intervals. These technical fixes, boring and incremental, would likely save lives in the long run. The wider conversation: aging fleets and risk management. This crash also fed a broader industry debate about aging aircraft fleets. Aircraft are durable machines, but every takeoff and landing is an investment of fatigue into metal and composite. Operators must balance cost against safety. The Louisville accident made stakeholders ask hard questions. When does an airframe become too risky to keep in heavy service? How do we ensure that the most heavily loaded components receive targeted attention? Risk management moved toward anticipatory inspection, not waiting for anomalies to become visible, but actively searching for them. Advanced structural health monitoring techniques and new sensor systems were piloted. In boardrooms and regulatory halls, the phrase predictive maintenance gained traction. Use data to find the crack before the crack finds you. Remembering, reforming, and rebuilding trust. Tragedies spark changes that often go unseen by the public. A rule rewritten, a torque procedure clarified, a mechanic empowered to take more time. In Louisville, memorials mark the place where lives changed forever. Meetings and hearings led to concrete changes in inspection requirements and the way airlines and regulators talk about aging systems. But the most human part of recovery is the way colleagues remember those lost. Quiet tributes in hangars, plaques in break rooms, scholarships established in the names of those who died. Safety improvements are measurable, but the emotional thread of remembrance is what keeps vigilance alive long after headlines fade. Conclusion: a small crack, a big lesson. The image of an engine fallen from the wing is visceral and terrifying. Yet the true lesson is less cinematic and more granular. Safety is the accumulation of tiny decisions made consistently. A microscopic crack ignored, a deferred inspection, a tired mechanic rushing through a checklist. These be the atoms that sometimes coalesce into catastrophe. The Louisville MD-11 accident was both a disaster and a lesson. It exposed the vulnerabilities of aging hardware under economic pressure, emphasized the need for rigorous inspection, and pushed an industry toward better predictive maintenance and cultural change. Those changes are slow, technical, and rarely dramatic, but they are the ones that gradually tilt the balance back towards safety. One inspection, one training session, and one enforced service bulletin at a time.